I'm going to tell Bunny Rob that anything that is said here is not necessarily factually accurate, but it is the best recollection possible, and it's what you're really more interested in is the flavor and the color of the island that comes through, rather than making sure that a hurricane was in 1932 and not 33. Okay?
Right.
Right.
Well, if you're asking me, what do I remember back in the early days?
I haven't asked you that. I haven't asked you that. No, I've thought a little bit about it.
I remember.
No, I want to know. No, I'm interested in some of these things too. I'd like to know, Daddy, how did Grandpa Loomis first discover Captiva?
Well, it was back about 1927 or 28 or 29. He had his general agent's convention over on the East Coast at the Hollywood Beach Hotel.
Was this the Connecticut Mutual General Agents?
This was the Connecticut Mutual General Agents, and there were about 75 or 80 of them in the country. And they would bring their wives each year. And the secretary of that company, Mr. Harold Steiner, whose wife incidentally is still living, had a house on Captiva, and Mr. Steiner would get Pop to come over and rest up a few days before going back to Hartford. As a matter of fact, that house is still there on the island, just north of Mucky Duck. It's been moved a half a dozen times, I guess, but it's still there, and Pop used to go over there, and that's how we became acquainted with the island.
And Mr. Steiner was an agent?
No, Mr. Steiner was secretary of the Connecticut Mutual,
Oh, okay.
and had that house over there. In the very early 30s, I think, he bought that house.
He was in Georgia.
He came from Georgia originally.
When was the first time that you went down to the island?
We went down, your mother and I went down in 1936 from St. Louis, and it took us 2 or 3 days to get there by train.
Oh, wait. Was that the first time you'd ever been to the island
That's
as well?
the first time, 1936, and that's quite a while ago.
And what was the occasion?
The occasion was a honeymoon, and we stayed at Twin Waters Inn.
No kidding.
Yeah.
In the bridal cottage?
Yeah, cottage numero uno.
Was that its real number?
Number 1. And the inn was owned and operated by Mr. and Mrs. Price, Grace and Bowman Price, who were really wonderful people and 2 of the stalwarts, I think, on the island, really.
Had Grandpa and Grandma recommended that you go down there for your honeymoon?
I think they did, and we haven't regretted it at all. As a matter of fact, we enjoyed it.
Mom, what was your reaction to the island when you first were there?
I thought I was going into a no man's land.
It certainly was no city.
When Mrs. Price met us at the ferry on Sanibel and drove us the length of Sanibel Island to Captiva, it seemed forever. And I later kept thinking it looked like the devastated area in Bivar when the, what was it, rhinoceroses or heffalumps or something?
Heffalumps are Winnie the Pooh.
Chopped off the tops of all the palm trees. Here were these little scrubby palmettos. It was not my idea of a tropical paradise with great, beautiful, tall palm trees. But when we got to Captiva, I thought differently.
Was the road on Sanibel paved then?
Oh,
Or I remember the Captiva
Washboard.
road was not paved, but
it was
wasn't
not
Sanibel
paved on Oh no, not for years. That's one reason when we got to Captiva, we didn't leave the island. We never went to Sanibel until it was time to go home. It was washboard the whole way, and there were differences of opinion. Some people said if you drive 35 miles an hour, that's just the right speed. You just hit the tops of those bumps. Other people hit them harder. Newcomers tried to take them slowly, and they had had their teeth shaken out.
What, was there electricity on the island then?
None.
Mostly kerosene lanterns. Everybody had kerosene lanterns.
What about plumbing? Was there running water, indoor plumbing?
Oh, yes, yes. We had artesian wells, which brought up sulfur water, which was very hard, and the fumes of it stained everything. They stained the walls of the bathrooms.
I remember that in Grandpa's house.
Yes.
It was in the
it's
toilets.
dreadful. Yeah. And some people had an aerating tank to clear out some of those sulfur fumes, but it was very bad.
Daddy-
We used rainwater. It cooked with and drank rainwater.
Daddy, what did you, I remember you had to dig holes for garbage.
That we did.
That was
And
your
I think
exercise
everybody
program?
else did too. And when we first drove down, we had, depending upon the length of time we were to stay there, if it was a 10-day visit, well, then I'd dig a hole about 4 feet across and 3 feet deep. And if the visit was 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it would be a 6-foot hole across and 3 or 4 feet deep. And everybody would flatten the cans and break the bottles and put that in the hole, and the garbage would go in there. And about every 2 or 3 days, I'd scrape some of the dirt back into the hole just to cover it up and make it look better.
We have a photograph. I remember you and Uncle Pill in one of those ditches out behind Grandpa's house. You ran up to here. Do you remember that picture?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
I didn't realize you had it so scientifically set up
We did.
that you knew how many cubic feet of trash you would generate.
that place today is known as Captiva Cove. And out back on the east side of that location, there's 3 duplexes.
Well, just think, you did the landfill for that.
They are on solid ground. I can
Just
tell you
think
there are probably 50 holes there, and real solid, and they're built there to stay there.
Just think what an archaeologist would find. The flotsam and jetsam of the era 1938-40.
When did Grandpa build his house? Or when did he decide to do that?
Well, I don't know when he decided to do it, but he started building it in the summer of '37 and finished in the fall of '38. And a retired couple from Michigan by the name of Remington, Mr. and Mrs. John Remington, who lived down just the other side of Blind Pass Bridge, built that house. And John did the hammering up on the roof, I can recall, and Mrs. Remington carried the heavy stuff up the ladder. And it took about 1.5 years to do it.
What, did Grandma and Grandpa go down every year, though, and stay at Tween Waters between the time when Mr. Steiner first got Grandpa over there? Or had Grandma been down there as well? Before the house was built?
I think they stayed at Tween Waters while the house was being built. And the house was quite a ways away from the actual water's edge of the Gulf at that time. The road went by the front of it, a dirt road, and then there were 3 rows of pine trees, each 50 feet apart before you even got to the water's edge.
50 feet apart between the rows?
Yes, there was
Before you got to the
150 or
Oh, I remember the rows of trees.
150 or 200 feet before you even got to the water. The word erosion didn't exist in those days.
Well, I remember that. I remember crossing the road and then having to go through pine trees and then down to the beach even. And I remember when the groins were put in even.
Yeah.
We all looked at the beach and thought, this is hideous. It was such a disruption of that. Now they've all,
Oh, those groins.
now they're all underwater, of course.
Yes, when I used to walk on the beach with Larry Weeks, after the groins were put in,
What year was that? About 52 maybe or so?
I
55?
don't know when those groins were put in. I really can't
Well,
remember.
I'd take a guess at somewhere around
I
48 to 52 into
Well,
there.
I remember when they were put in. I remember seeing them for the first time.
But the east end, I guess you'd say, of those groins, the beach, the landside
roadside.
end, was up against the vegetation, so that it spoiled all our beach walking. We had to climb over every groin when we walked on the beach.
Was there a lot of controversy about putting those in?
I don't remember. We used to spend only 2 weeks there.
Yeah.
So we really don't know about that, but I just remember that when we walked the beach, we'd have to, after the groins were first put, we had to climb over each one. That's why we used to walk on the Redfish Pass, which was beautiful. We could walk there.
Yeah. When describe what life was like on the island, circa 1952,
52.
46,
36.
36. Go back to the 30s for the.
It was
for the moment.
lovely. It was very quiet, very low key.
no electricity,
No electricity.
no real transportation.
No telephones. There was one telephone on Sanibel, a payphone in a little booth that just stuck out of the ground like a mushroom.
There wasn't any phone. There must have been a phone at Bailey's.
There was a telephone at Bailey's.
In the old.
And if there was an emergency call for anyone on Captiva, telegram or anything like that, it would go to Bailey's. They would decide if it was an emergency. And then Francis would send someone from the store by car up to Captiva to deliver the message. And this was our only communication, although often there would be a boat at South Seas, which was then, what was it called?
South Seas.
Yes, it was called South Seas then, I guess. And there would be someone there who had a ship-to-shore telephone, maybe. So sometimes we could fall back on that.
Was there an emergency? Do you ever remember an emergency?
Yes. When our oldest boy, Jim, was 3 years old, which would be in 1940, he was very sick. He had strep throat, and he was in the hospital, and we sent a telegram to Grandma and Grandpa Loomis because there was a real concern about his survival.
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that Jim was very sick, but I didn't realize it was at Captiva.
Well, we weren't at Captiva. Grandma and Grandpa were at
Oh,
Captiva.
okay.
We were here. So we kept them in touch with how things were going. So
Well, everybody
But-
must have known about it.
everybody on Captiva knew about it because the message came from Sanibel. And that, let's see, 1940, Grandma and Grandpa had just moved into their house.
Gotta try this cheese, Daddy. It tastes like caramel.
It is the strangest
Isn't it-
color. I
isn't
can't
it-
wait
isn't it
to
interesting?
try it.
It's very strange stuff. It's sweet,
Is it?
practically. I'll get more crackers. Well, why not? What the heck? Who was? I want to ask.
Oh, you used to get a groceries in those days or something too.
I mean, yeah. You want to tell me about it, Daddy?
Yeah. I like to eat. I did then, I still do.
Oh,
The mail boat used to bring the groceries over for everybody. And the trick was to get down to the mailboat landing and give the Singleton brothers your list. And sure enough, the next day it would come back exactly right at noon when the mailboat got there, and there was no problem.
how did you pay them?
Once a month, I think we sent a check over to the store. I've forgotten its name, over in Fort Myers.
Sunshine Market.
Sunshine Market in St. and Fort Myers.
No, we would write to them and give them our order, but we would ask the Singleton brothers to get us a roll of film or a box of Band-Aids or a bottle of aspirin.
I mean, something that wasn't on your original list.
And seldom would there be an error.
It was not
Everything
from a grocery store. They'd get us shoelaces, a T-shirt, whatever. And we would pay them direct, but they put all these little notes. You give them a note listing all the things that you wanted outside of what came from the Sunshine Market. You sent your letter to them separately. And they'd tuck it in the shirt pocket. And you think, I don't think you'll ever find my note with everybody's. But they'd come the next day, everything would be delivered, and they'd say, you owe us $2.37.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful
So
service.
you had a credit line with them, huh?
You bet.
Yeah, those fellows were great. Two brothers that ran that mailboat.
Did they run it up until it stopped running?
Yes, and I don't remember exactly when that was. Probably about, I'd take a guess, 30 years ago. 25 to 30 years
When the
ago.
causeway.
When the causeway was.
When the causeway was built, then things started to really hop on both islands.
What was the major form of entertainment before the, let's say, before the causeway?
Well, before the causeway, it was all on the beach. Well, first of all, everybody went to the post office.
That hasn't changed.
That's right. But everybody met there for very urgent reasons. It was to exchange gossip and to invite your neighbor to come by and have a drink that night, that kind of thing. Very important to be there. And the mailboat would arrive at about noon, and that was a big
I don't think there were
Just like having
mailboxes
the
then.
Robert E. Lee come in,
It
wasn't
certainly was.
Yeah.
Mailboxes then? Did we have
No.
mailboxes?
No.
That's fairly new. The idea of a mailbox over there.
Didn't
is fairly
Beulah
new.
just give you the mail over the counter?
Yes. Yeah. But the mailboat would come in, and on the top of the mailboat and in it would be tourists. And the mailboat would stop at the post office, which was where near Timmy's Nook. And then it would go around to Andy's dock, and the tourists would get off at Andy's, and they would either have brought their lunch and they would walk across to the beach, or they would stop at the Sunshine or at the Parker's store, the Island store, and and have lunch. And it was an outing. The boat would stay at Andy's probably for about an hour, and then it would go back to the post office, so that if you had an urgent bit of mail, you had time to get your mail, answer it, and get it back out by on the same day.
Was that the reason it held that schedule?
I haven't any idea.
Maybe it's just because the Singleton, was that the
It was
reason?
lunch hour.
Brothers
yes.
needed lunch.
That could be.
Did they have lunch at the Sunshine?
I don't know where they had lunch.
Singletons?
Yeah, or Andy's?
No, they
I
didn't.
don't know.
They didn't.
Probably at Andy's. Well, I don't know. The Sunshine, incidentally, was run by May and Bill Shannon.
Yes. Best hamburgers on the
Oh.
2 islands.
Yeah.
Get off! Chloe, get down! You woo! Well,
The local color.
the local car. Right. What about, what's the matter? You going fishing?
Yeah.
What do you want to talk
Going
about?
fishing.
Oh, he wants.
You want to tell the twigfish story?
No, that's too long and complicated. There's no point in that.
What about,
takes-
what do you want to tell about fishing?
Well, about fishing, there are only 3 good fishing holes in those days. Blind Pass was one. You wouldn't believe it today, but the other side of the old bridge
It's still a good
was a
fishing place.
big hole, big as 2 or 3 football fields, and that was one of the prime places for tarpon in April, May, and June. And then behind Buck Key was another one.
Behind it, you
Behind
mean
Buck Key,
Bayside?
there
I mean, behind
Bayside.
Townsend?
Yeah.
over on
Yeah.
the north end of Buck Key, there was a pretty good tarpon fishing place. But of course, the best place was Redfish Pass, and there were 4 or 5 guides. That's about all we had then. And fishing was from about 5:30 to 9:30. Nobody paid any attention to tides and all that. They just went up at 5:30 and came back at 9:30, and everybody seemed to catch tarpon. And the bait that was used was nothing more than a mullet, a small mullet, perhaps 10 or 12 inches long, sliced from end to end so that it made 2 baits, you see. And all he did was drag that.
Sliced from end? You mean you cut it lengthwise?
Cut it lengthwise so it made 2 small fillets.
2 skinny mullet.
Yeah, 2 skinny mullets, and that made a perfect bait. And all we did was just drag that thing back and forth, regardless of tide, and we caught fish nearly every night.
I think what you could have done what do you mean why at night? Did you always go at night?
5:30, yes, 5:30 to 9 o'clock or
Did you
so,
have a
long in there.
cocktail? Did you have a cocktail in one hand?
No,
No, we
not
didn't.
in those
No.
days.
No, you haven't.
There were 4 or 5 fishing guides. That was about it.
Was
Belt Johnson was, I think, numero uno. He was
And Andy,
Andy Rossi,
also numero.
Carl and Herman Dickey. Herman was, incidentally, I think, about the top
He wasn't
flight
a
guy.
guide.
No, he wasn't a guide. He was really
Two friends.
He was really the person on the island that everybody went to at that time and in those days for problems. If there were problems developing, Herman Dickey
What kind of
was the
problem?
one to see.
What kind of
Anything
problems?
pertaining to whatever the island activities might be.
Well, I mean,
Herman,
if you're sitting
and
clogged up,
Max
you didn't call him.
Max Hayford was also very much in demand in those days. He did about everything too.
Well,
But the fishing, I'm just telling you about the fishing. We'd catch them up at Redfish Pass, and it used to be about $7 or $8 for a half a day and $15 for a whole day. But old Captain Harry Strand kind of busted that out by changing the rules, so called, and he would charge $7.50 for a half a day, and then if you went out with him a whole day, it was $10. And that's 8 or 9
Economies of
hours for
scale.
$10, and he'd supply the bait, rod, reel, the whole works. Now it's $125 for 4 hours, and it has to be exactly between this hour and that hour because of tides and all that. We didn't pay any attention to tides then.
Well,
And we caught fish too. Nearly every night somebody would catch one.
well, you
Nobody
gotta
went.
keep this little discussion on a positive note, Daddy. It's not your
Really?
chance to get on your soapbox about rising costs and inflation.
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's real.
I
Nobody
know that you're
ever.
gonna be telling me that your first apartment was $45 a month in a couple of minutes.
Nobody ever went as far away as Captiva Pass. It was just those 3 good fishing holes, and everybody went there. And everybody caught fish, and everybody had a good time.
Times change.
Yeah,
There probably
but
aren't
you
as many tarpon as there used to be.
There are. I think
That's
there are a lot
my
more.
glass, and I'm passing it to you for a little more.
Mom, Dad didn't want to tell the story about the immortal twigfish, but why don't you?
I'd like to.
That's so complicated. Yeah, you can't
Well,
figure it out.
all right. We
Daddy.
were out one night. I have to disagree with Bud about the time of fishing. I think we fished the outgoing tide. No, yes, outgoing tide. But it was wonderful because we did go out in the very late afternoon or even night. Sometimes we'd go out about 4 or 5:30. Other times we wouldn't go out until 8 o'clock at night. It was cooler and it was delightful going out at night. And anyway, one time we were out fishing in Redfish Pass, and it was dark, and there was another boat near us. We could hear the voices, and we recognized Jay Darling's voice, and our
Just
guide.
As in Ding Darling.
Yes, and our guide, I think was Earl Johnson, Belton's brother. He said the guide was Carl Dickey. And there was another man in the boat.
Wait, Carl Dickey, you had two guides?
Carl Dickey was the guide in this other boat.
Oh, with Jay
with
Darling.
Jay Darling. And the third person in the boat, we learned later, was Kent Curtis.
Oh, Cruises in the Sun.
Yes, who wrote Cruises in the Sun, and he had taught school down there when there was a school there. Gosh, that's a biggie.
It's all I saw.
Anyway, we could hear lots of laughter, and they were having a good time in that boat, but we could just see their dim outline. And then all of a sudden, their engine revved up, and they went charging into the bay and then charging out, and obviously they had a tarpon because we could imagine, at any rate, we could hear the lines singing out from the reel. And this went on for quite a while, and intense periods of silence. And finally, the engine stopped. There was a long period of silence, and then just bursts of laughter, which we couldn't explain. Well, the next day, Jay Darling came up to our house and said, "I'm having a cocktail party tonight, and I hope you can come." I said, "Yes, we'd love to." We went down.
This was at Grandpa's house.
When we were, yes,
You
we
were in
were at
Grandpa's
house, yes, and he was in his place at Twin Waters.
Oh, all right.
Jay Darling, yeah. So we went down to his cottage at Twin Waters and discovered this was an unveiling of a plaque presented to Kent Curtis. And this thing was over the fireplace, and at an appropriate time, Jay Darling revealed the commemorative behind the curtain, and it was a twig, a piece of mangrove,
Big though, wait.
mounted on a piece of wood, all nicely shellacked, and underneath it says, "Captiva twigfish, caught after grueling battle of 35 minutes by Kent Curtis."
How big was it?
Oh, the
Oh, 3 or
twig
4
was
feet
about
long.
3 or 4 feet.
Might have weighed 5 pounds. It put up really quite a fight.
Oh,
Put up a fight, huh?
Yeah,
the
a real
laughter from that boat was just marvelous.
This was in Redfish Pass?
Yes, but the wonderful thing was fishing in the dark. Your imagination went wild thinking
Yeah.
about what every other boat was doing. As soon as you'd hear their engine rev up, you'd think, "Oh, got an 85-pound tarpon,"
Yeah.
and here we are with nothing.
How do you like that cheese there?
Excellent.
Isn't it strange?
Wish there were more of it.
Would you like some more? I'll give you
That's
some
for
more.
tomorrow night.
Listen, I have plenty because I knew you were coming tonight too.
Good.
What about, well, I remember lots of dropping in on
Yes.
Captiva
Yes.
in those days, and long pants and jackets were unheard of.
That's right.
It was shorts and t-shirts,
That's right.
and when you dressed up, you put on shoes
That's right.
practically.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
is
that's
that
because
true?
we had no telephones. People visited in the morning.
Yeah.
Someone would stop by at about 10 or 10:30 to invite you to come down for a drink that night. No plans were made farther than that evening.
Mhm.
It was nice.
Well, so what was?
And it would be very informal. And when we would be down there, if we weren't doing anything one night, which was not an unusual thing, but I thought it would be nice to have somebody over, I'd tell Dad to go down, walk on the beach.
And whoever he met?
And he would walk on the beach, and he'd meet someone and talk to them, and pretty soon he'd come back and he'd say, "I met an awfully nice couple on the beach, and I asked them to come back and have a drink with us around 5 o'clock." And I'd say, "Great,
Is that how?
just what I was hoping."
Is that how you met some of your current pals?
No, most of those people were temporary visitors, as we were, but
Yeah.
we're now permanent.
Yeah.
But this was really, you either, I mean, there was no other means of meeting people except on the beach. The
Well-
beach was the area.
I remember
Now
that.
it's the golf course or tennis
Yeah,
court.
I remember that everybody knew everybody somehow, and if when I was a teenager I spotted a boy whom I thought was cute, and especially if he had on some sort of college sweatshirt, that it would be easy to get an introduction somehow, because all I had to do was say there was a cute boy who had on a sweatshirt that said University of Ohio or something like that. And you'd say, oh, that must be so-and-so's nephew, grandson, son.
Yeah.
And anything could be manipulated because of that network.
Yeah, it's true.
Well,
You
what
know,
are
they-
some of the things now, what are some of the things that you don't miss from back then?
Don't miss.
What about
Well-
the sense of the accessibility of services when you need them?
We didn't miss it. We used to take our laundry into Fort Myers to a laundromat about once every 10 days. We didn't have much laundry because we wore the same clothes.
Wore bathing suits.
Wore bathing suits. That's right. And we didn't, no, I would go into Fort Myers about once a week, take my laundry in and do it there. It was much simpler living.
Who do you think is the most colorful character you met on those? Captiva was
Well, you mean the local people?
I
or-
don't care, anybody, whether a
Well,
visitor.
I doff my hat to Andy Rossi. I think back in those days in the 30s, he was 6'4" and 190 pounds and really muscular and nice fella, and he worked for Mr. and Mrs. Price at Tween Waters. And the island being where it is, and part of Lee County, it's really you might say the tail of Lee County, way out on the tip end. I can't remember seeing a constable, an officer, or a police car, or a two-wheeled motorcycle out there at all. There wasn't any law enforcement, as I can remember, there at all. And whenever there was a problem that developed on the island, Andy Rossi was called upon, and he'd come out and either he'd fix up the situation. I think he would, either peacefully or otherwise. And he was pretty much a law and order fellow. He worked for Tween Waters, and I take my hat off to Andy. He's done a great job there, and everybody's crazy about him.
What about you, Mom? Do you have any special?
I don't know.
Did you ever meet Anwar Lindbergh or?
No.
Or I know when the Darlings were in the fish house, didn't or some of my most unforgettable character.
Yeah. Well, you've really thrown me for a loop. Larry Weeks was a colorful character.
Mary Bailey.
Yeah, Mary Bailey.
Bailey.
Ding Darling, certainly.
Can you tell the Adlai Stevenson story? Maybe not.
No, I don't think.
Adlai
I can.
Stevenson used to come down there to see some of his friends from the Chicago area, and enjoyed, I think, the area very much. He came back several times, as I recall, and on Saturday nights, he used to like to go out on Andy's dock, which was the center of activity, really, and the music was supplied by what do you call it, a gramophone, or
You don't mean
come
a
up to date, they
jukebox?
call it a big troll.
Jukebox.
I don't think they had jukeboxes
Oh,
then.
they
It was a
did.
big troll. And there were big deals going on there Saturday nights at Andy's dock. Everybody went out there and had a good time. In evening clothes and all kinds, barefooted, can't imagine. And Adlai Stevenson enjoyed that. As I remember, came down from Chicago a number of times to stay there and relax there. He was a nice fellow.
You know, one thing I remember that was nice, after Grandpa built his house, and we stayed there, there was a shortcut to the post office.
We used to call that going through the jungle.
Through the jungle.
The jungle.
That's right.
And
it
Pete
was
and Jim-
spooky.
It was terrible. Pete and Jim and Tom had me convinced that the thing had multiple coral snakes in there,
That's
and
right.
I was going to die.
Well, it was a beautiful path,
Yes. Scary. And
but it was
Dickens,
scary.
though. I used to run.
Yeah, I can remember.
Oh,
And you'd hear things crackling overhead or over on the side, and you
lizards.
imagine lizards and snakes and crocodiles and all kinds of things jumping out at you. And it wasn't until, a number of years after, well, I don't know whether after we'd stopped using it, after Grandpa sold his house, that I learned that Miriam Johnson was the one who kept it chopped back.
Oh, kept the path open?
She kept the path open. And now that I've been living down there as long as we have, I realize that that's a job to keep the path
So
open.
we just took it for granted.
Yes, we just thought it was there because we used it.
Yeah.
But people would walk to the post office from as far down as Twin Waters. They'd walk up the path in front of all the houses along there, not on the road, but along the path in front of the houses, in front of Grandpa's house. And then after they'd passed in front of Grandpa's house, they'd cut back of Belton's house.
Yes.
And then take that jungle path to the post office.
It was always very dark in there,
Oh, it
even
was.
at midday because of the vegetation.
No sunlight.
Oh,
got through.
it was frightening.
There was a large open area up in there somewhere where we used to play baseball. And Captiva and Sanibel had baseball games, and I can remember playing on the Captiva team, and Francis Bailey was a big hitter for the Sanibel team, and whenever he had hit one, it seemed to me I had to be the fellow that went out and shacked it up way out deep center field somewhere.
You mean shagged it?
Shagged
Shagged it up.
shagged it up.
It's a Freudian slip or
He was-
something.
He was a big hitter then.
Did you pitch, Daddy?
Oh yes, I tried to.
Tried.
Center, yeah,
Modest.
rotated between
Modest.
pitch and center field.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know. That's all built up now.
How many, if you went down to Captiva first in 1936,
Right.
have you been there every year then for the past almost 50?
No.
Excuse me, or when did you
No.
miss?
We
Almost.
sometimes we went down. We drove down twice in the same year.
Well, but
Yeah,
I don't mean how
back,
many
but-
trips have you made, but have you been down there every
Not
year?
every year. No,
Not
we
quite,
skipped.
but
We skipped
awfully
several.
close.
Did you miss during the war with rationing of gas or
A
what?
couple
Yeah.
of years. A couple of years during the war.
But I think we made about 65 or 75 round trips
Have you, at
from
least,
Connecticut down there and back.
have you, did you ever have to, were you ever there during a storm that was of hurricane force?
No.
No,
No.
we've been fortunate.
I wish we
to
had.
miss that.
I'd
Oh,
love to
dear.
see.
Would you stay during a hurricane?
I think I'm just dumb enough, so I probably would.
Not if I were there, I'd drag you out.
You know, the old Blind Pass Bridge,
The rickety rick.
the rickety one, was too narrow for two cars to pass on it. It was wood and humped up in the middle. And the
Couldn't
rule was that the first guy on there had the right of way, and the second fella had to back off.
Who knew?
And
Who
every
was first?
so often there'd be a real good fat argument down there about that. And I can still see the big flat-headed nails that were sticking up probably a 1/16 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch. And I often marveled at driving across that bridge and not understanding why every single tire wouldn't blow out before you get on the other side.
Yeah. What do you think was the best time that you've ever had on Captiva? And I don't mean just necessarily in the old days. I mean, it could have happened this spring. Or the event that sticks the most in your mind, whether it's the storm or the twig fish or somebody's party or
That's
I don't know how to answer that one.
I don't either. You've drawn a blank from us.
I remember going up, we were talking before about some of the entertainment. I remember seeing Call Me Madam.
Where?
I hear singing and there's no up at the community house. They used to show movies up there.
Oh, yes.
Didn't it? Was
I
that?
don't remember that.
Oh, I remember that. That's Ethel Merman just knocked my socks off. I memorized one of the songs that Donald O'Connor sang in that. Sweet and
I don't.
They used to show movies up there, didn't they?
Occasionally, and they still do it occasionally. I wish more.
Yeah, it'd be nice if that.
And before South Seas was South Seas,
As we know it, as we know it.
as we know it, they occasionally had movies there,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd pay about 50 cents, go up there,
Folding chairs.
folding chairs, and it was wait while the film was switched to another camera, you know, the reels that
Yeah.
wound out or whatever. But you know, one of the things that I remember that was fun was when we came down to Captiva by train. We would have about a 3-hour stop in Jacksonville at night, and then we could leave the train and then board again, and then we would start in the middle of the night from Jacksonville to Fort Myers, and in the morning we would wake up above Arcadia someplace.
Around Haines City, as I recall. That's for breakfast, you mean?
No, but in Arcadia, the train stopped, and everybody got off the train. The passengers, the crew, and walked across the tracks to a diner and had breakfast. No, that was in Arcadia.
Well, okay.
Anyway,
Either-
Central Florida.
Either
Yeah,
Arcadia
it
or
was.
Haines City,
And
right?
then at a certain point, the conductor would pull his watch out and say, "All right, all aboard," and we'd all scramble back across the tracks and get on
Pay
the
your
train.
checks.
Yeah.
The train would blow its whistle a couple times, and
Yeah.
everybody would run out of the diner and run back onto the train and get on board and take off.
But before that,
How did you get it? No, go ahead.
the porter would come through and he would give us orange juice, fresh orange juice. And then we would pull into Arcadia and then we'd get off the train and we'd have a delicious breakfast. Scrambled eggs or whatever, bacon,
What?
and grits, I suppose.
Once you got off the train, though, in Fort Myers, how did you get out to the island? Did you rent a car?
Taxi.
Take a taxi to
Charlie
Punta Gorda?
Pravat. Remember Charlie Pravat?
Charlie Pravat had a half a dozen cabs, and he was always reliable and on hand, and would meet the train and take you over to the ferry in Punta Rassa, and
Punta Rassa.
Then we'd wait.
Leon Crumpler. Leon Crumpler was in charge of the 3 ferry boats, and each one of them carried 6 or 8 cars. And Pravat would take you over there to Punta Rassa, get on the Leon Crumpler boat, you go across to the landing on the other side, which is right next door to Bailey's old store.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of your friends perhaps would meet you there and take you on up to where you're going to stay.
You didn't really need a car then when you were on the island.
No,
Did you use bicycles much?
We
When
walked.
you'd want to go up to
We walked.
Harvard?
Everybody
we
walked.
walked every
Yeah.
place. We walked from Grandpa's house to the store, to the post office, to the store. And we walked to Twin Waters.
Where else did you have to go?
There was no place else
You'd
to
go
go.
to South Seas sometimes.
Never.
though. We used to go up there occasionally
Well,
for dinner.
that was when we drove. That was when we had a car, when we drove down.
When we would drive to.
But I'm talking about back in the late 30s. But also, if we went down to Captiva by train, the train got into Fort Myers at about 5 o'clock at night, which was too late to catch the last ferry to Captiva. So we would arrive from the cold north and we'd pull into that beautiful Spanish style station with its bougainvillea and all this. It was really a wonderful greeting. And then we would go to the Bradford Hotel, and we'd have to spend the night at the Bradford. And then the next day, go out to Captiva, because we were too late.
The Bradford Hotel was the real place in those days. And I can remember spending the night there with some of our kids on the way down, and I had a snow shovel in the car. Remember that? And quite by accident, the next morning, I
Took it out of the trunk.
I left the snow shovel leaning up against the front door of the Bradford Hotel and forgot it and left it there and went over to the island. And 3 or 4 days later, there was a news item in